"Ma'am, I'm afraid you can't stay here. You'll have to leave." The words cut through the hotel lobby like cold glass. Guests turned their heads. Some pretended not to notice, others stared openly, but all of them could hear it. The sharp, dismissive tone of the man behind the front desk as he spoke to the black woman standing there with her small leather suitcase. Her name was Evelyn. She was neatly dressed in a navy blue dress with pearl buttons, her hair pinned with care. She looked tired, but also dignified, like someone who had carried the weight of long years and still stood tall. She blinked once, twice, as if she hadn't heard him right. "I made a reservation," she said quietly, sliding her ID across the counter. The man didn't even look at it. "We're fully booked," I said. "You'll have to leave." His voice was louder this time, almost shouting, as if volume alone could erase her presence. Evelyn's lips parted. Her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes never left his. "This is my hotel," she said softly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests gasped, others whispered to each other. The receptionist stiffened, his face pale, then flushed red. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Evelyn lifted her hand slowly, gracefully, and said only 4 words. "Shut it down. Now." The lobby fell into silence. 10 minutes later, the impossible happened. The lights flickered, the computers at the desk went black, and the electronic locks on the doors clicked. Guests exchanged panicked looks. The man at the front desk swallowed hard, realizing he was no longer in control. The woman he had just denied, humiliated, and dismissed was the one with the ultimate power. And that was the moment the entire hotel shut down. But who was this woman? And how could she hold such authority in a place where she had just been refused a room? Before that shocking command, before the disbelief that spread like wildfire across the lobby, Evelyn had lived a life of quiet battles and quiet triumphs. And her story, the road that brought her to this very moment, began long before the night the hotel closed its doors. Evelyn was born in Georgia, raised in a small wooden house with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. Her mother used to say, "Child, the world won't always be kind, but you must be kind to yourself and others. Kindness is the armor they can't take from you." Those words stayed with her through the hardest days of her life. As a girl, Evelyn had to fight for everything: fairness at school, respect in town, a voice in spaces where her skin and her gender made her invisible. She learned quickly that standing still meant being overlooked, and so she worked harder than anyone else. By the time she was 17, Evelyn was cleaning rooms in the same kind of hotel she now stood in decades later. She remembered scrubbing floors until her knees ached, making beds so tightly you could bounce a coin off them, and carrying trays twice her size up endless flights of stairs. But unlike many who worked there, Evelyn never stopped watching. She watched how the managers spoke to guests. She memorized how the booking system worked. She listened when owners came in for meetings, storing away every detail. She wasn't just a maid, she was a student of the business. Her friends laughed when she told them, "One day I'll have my own hotel." They thought it was impossible, but Evelyn didn't. She held on to that dream as if it were the last piece of hope she owned. Years passed. Evelyn grew into a woman who knew both hunger and determination. She worked days cleaning rooms, nights studying hotel management from borrowed books, and weekends attending community meetings where she learned the power of networking. Her kindness opened doors, but her persistence kept them open. Still, not everyone wanted her to succeed. One afternoon, as she was finishing her shift at a downtown inn, Evelyn overheard 2 managers whispering. One chuckled and said, "Can you imagine her trying to run a place like this? She can barely afford her rent." They laughed, not knowing she was standing just beyond the doorway. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't confront them. She only whispered to herself, "Watch me." And she meant it. Years later she would. But before that triumph, before the chandeliers and marble floors, Evelyn would face a series of battles that tested her strength, her patience, and her belief in humanity. Like the day a wealthy guest left without paying, and the cost was docked from her wages. Or the night she worked 12 hours straight and still couldn't afford the bus ride home. Or the week her mother fell ill, and Evelyn had to choose between buying medicine or paying the gas bill. Each of those moments chipped away at her body, but not at her spirit. She reminded herself, "Kindness, Evelyn, don't lose it, even when they try to take it from you." And so she gave. She helped other maids write resumes. She snuck extra bread from the kitchen for the bellboys who hadn't eaten. She smiled at rude guests because she understood that meanness often came from misery, but kindness alone would not be enough. Evelyn would need to rise higher, and to do that, she would need to risk everything. And one day, that risk came knocking at her door. It was a humid summer morning when Evelyn received a letter in the mail. The paper was thin, almost see-through, but the words printed on it changed the course of her life. Her eyes widened as she read, "Notice of auction. The Carlton Hotel, located at 17th and Main, is available for purchase." The Carlton. A grand, historic hotel that had once hosted presidents and movie stars, now crumbling and forgotten. For Evelyn, it wasn't just a building, it was a chance. But chance came with danger. The price tag was higher than anything she had ever imagined. She would need investors, loans, and faith that her dream was worth it. She folded the letter, pressed it against her chest, and whispered, "This is it." What Evelyn did next would set her on a collision course with betrayal, sacrifice, and finally, the moment she would stand in that very hotel, denied a room at her own front desk. But the road to that night was not simple, because for every door that opened, another slammed shut, and for every hand that reached out to help, another pulled away. Still, Evelyn pushed forward, and the first real test of her courage came sooner than she expected. That afternoon, Evelyn walked into the bank, clutching the auction letter and a folder full of notes. She had studied every number, every detail, until her eyes burned. She stood before the loan officer, a man in a crisp gray suit who looked her up and down like she was an inconvenience. "Miss," he said, sighing, "these numbers are impressive, but let's be realistic. Women don't usually run hotels, especially not—" His words trailed off, but the meaning was clear, "especially not you." Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "Sir, I'm not asking what women usually do. I'm telling you what I will do." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll need more than confidence to own a hotel." Evelyn's lips curved into a small smile. "You're right. That's why I also brought a business plan." She slid the folder across the desk. The man's brows rose as he glanced at the papers. Evelyn had outlined every cost, every revenue stream, every potential obstacle. She had done her homework, and she had done it well. But would it be enough? Because as she sat there, waiting for his answer, the loan officer leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said something that would shake the very ground beneath her feet. The loan officer leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. His office was quiet, save for the ticking of a wall clock and the distant hum of the air conditioner. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her folder of carefully prepared papers resting between them. She had given him her numbers, her plan, her dream. Now she waited. Finally, he said it. "I'm afraid we can't approve this." The words hit Evelyn like a stone to the chest. She held her breath, waiting for him to explain, but the officer just shrugged and added, "It's too big a risk. Hotels are failing left and right, and frankly, well, you'd be better off looking for something smaller. Maybe a boarding house, something less complicated." A boarding house? Evelyn felt her stomach turn. She wasn't here to run something small. She had worked her whole life to stand here today, in this very office, asking for this very chance. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you didn't even finish looking through the plan." The officer chuckled. "I've seen enough. These numbers look good on paper, but let's be realistic. Running a place like the Carlton requires experience, connections, money. His eyes narrowed. Tell me, what do you really have? Evelyn leaned forward. I have the drive, I have the knowledge, and I have a dream that is bigger than your doubts. For a moment, silence filled the room. The officer shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with her determination. Then he smirked, picked up the folder, and shoved it back across the desk. Dreams don't pay the bills, Miss Evelyn. I'm sorry. The answer is no. The sound of the folder sliding across the polished wood felt final. But Evelyn didn't reach for it. She didn't stand up. She didn't cry. Instead, she folded her hands neatly in her lap and said, "Thank you for your time." Then she rose, steady and proud, even though her heart was breaking inside. She walked out of that office, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble floor. To the loan officer, it was the end of her story. To Evelyn, it was only the beginning. That evening, Evelyn sat on her porch with her mother. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, and the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Evelyn's face was heavy with disappointment, but her mother noticed the fire that still flickered in her daughter's eyes. "Child," her mother said gently, "did you think the first door you knocked on would be the one to open?" Evelyn sighed. "Mama, it wasn't just a no, it was the way he looked at me, like I didn't belong there, like I wasn't enough." Her mother reached over, placing a wrinkled hand over Evelyn's. "You are enough, more than enough. Don't let someone else's small vision make your dream smaller. If one door shuts, you knock on the next, and the next, and the next, until you find the one that opens." Evelyn smiled faintly. "But what if they all stay shut?" Her mother's eyes gleamed with quiet strength. "Then, child, you build your own door." Those words lit a spark inside Evelyn. She realized that waiting for permission was no longer an option. If banks wouldn't believe in her, she would find people who did. The next few months tested every ounce of her courage. Evelyn worked double shifts, saved every dollar, and spoke to anyone who would listen. She pitched her dream at church meetings, community gatherings, and even to strangers she met at the bus stop. Some laughed, some smiled politely, but a few, just a few, leaned in and listened. Among them was Mr. Johnson, an older gentleman who owned a small trucking company. He had known Evelyn since she was a little girl and had always admired her work ethic. One evening, after listening to her explain her hotel plan for the third time, he said, "You remind me of myself when I started out. People told me I couldn't, but here I am. Maybe it's time I put my money where my mouth is." Evelyn's heart leapt. "You mean—" "I'll invest," he said, smiling. "Not much, but enough to help get you started." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. You won't regret it." Word spread. Slowly, others began to contribute. Small business owners, church members, even neighbors who scraped together what little they could spare. They didn't have much, but they believed in Evelyn. They believed in her dream. With each dollar, each handshake, each whispered prayer, Evelyn built something stronger than a business deal. She built a community around her dream, but not everyone was cheering for her. One evening, after leaving a meeting with potential investors, Evelyn returned home to find a note pinned to her front door. The paper was crumpled, the handwriting jagged and rushed. It read, "Stay in your place. You don't belong in that world. Stop before you embarrass yourself." Her hands shook as she read it. Fear twisted in her stomach, but anger rose just as quickly. She crumpled the note and threw it into the trash. Evelyn refused to be scared into silence. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, and she was right. Because someone didn't just want her to fail, they were willing to take steps to make sure of it. The day of the hotel auction finally arrived. The Carlton stood tall, though worn with age. Its grand columns were chipped, its once glittering chandeliers dimmed with dust, but Evelyn didn't see decay. She saw possibility. The auctioneer's voice rang out across the room, rapid and sharp as bids filled the air. Evelyn clutched her folder, her heart racing as the numbers climbed higher and higher. She wasn't the only one who wanted the Carlton. Wealthy investors, developers, and hotel chains all had their eyes on the building. 500,000, one man shouted. 550, another called. Evelyn waited, timing her bid carefully. She raised her hand. 575. Heads turned. Some laughed quietly. Who was this woman daring to stand among them? The auctioneer's hammer hovered in the air. 575. Do I hear 600? Another voice cut through the room. 600. The numbers soared higher. Evelyn felt the weight of her community's trust pressing against her chest. Every dollar she had scraped together, every promise she had made, it all came down to this moment. And then, just as she thought she might be able to hold her ground, a familiar voice echoed from across the room. 700,000. Evelyn's heart dropped. She turned and saw him, the loan officer from the bank. He was here, and he wasn't bidding for himself. He was bidding for someone else, someone who wanted the Carlton just as badly as Evelyn did. And suddenly, Evelyn realized her fight had just become much harder than she ever imagined. The air inside the auction hall grew heavy, almost suffocating. Evelyn's palms were slick with sweat as she clutched her paddle tighter. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the auctioneer's rapid-fire voice calling out the latest numbers. 700,000! The loan officer had shouted on behalf of his client. His smug smile cut through the crowd like a knife. He didn't even look at Evelyn, not directly, but she knew the bid had been made for her. It was a strike, a challenge. He wanted her to see that he was still in control. Her throat tightened. 700,000. That was already higher than the figure she had painstakingly built her community's investment around. It was more than she thought she could manage. But then Evelyn remembered her mother's words. If one door shuts, you knock on the next. And if they all shut, you build your own door. She raised her paddle slowly. 725. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A maid-turned-hotel dreamer had just outbid men in tailored suits and polished shoes. The auctioneer pointed to her. 725. Do I hear 750? 750. The loan officer snapped, his voice like a whip. He still didn't look at her, as if she were beneath acknowledgement. Evelyn's stomach twisted, but she forced her hand up again. 775. The crowd murmured louder. Some faces looked amused, others doubtful, a few curious, but Evelyn didn't look at them. She locked her gaze on the auctioneer, refusing to let fear drive her away. The loan officer leaned over to whisper something to his client, a tall man in an expensive suit. The man smirked, nodded, and raised his hand. 800,000. Evelyn's chest tightened. 800,000. She knew her limit was near. She had investors, but not endless ones. Every bid higher brought her closer to breaking. The auctioneer banged the gavel against the podium lightly. 800,000. Do I hear 825? The room went silent, waiting. Evelyn's hand shook as she lifted her paddle again. 825. The crowd erupted in whispers. A woman in the back shook her head in disbelief. A man near the front chuckled under his breath. Evelyn felt their doubts surround her like smoke, but she refused to let it choke her. Then came the voice again. 850. Cold, sharp, unyielding. The number echoed through her chest like a hammer. Evelyn froze. 850,000. That was it. That was beyond what she had. Her breath quickened. She glanced down at her notes, the figures she had calculated 100 times over. She couldn't risk everything and lose. If she pushed further without the money to back it up, she would not only lose the auction, she would lose the faith of everyone who had trusted her. Her fingers trembled. She lowered the paddle. The auctioneer's voice rang out, crisp and final. 850,000 going once, going twice, sold. The gavel struck wood with a sharp crack. The crowd clapped politely. Evelyn's chest felt hollow. She had lost. That night, Evelyn sat on her bed staring at the faded wallpaper in her room. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and cruel. She thought about Mr. Johnson, about the church ladies who had slipped wrinkled bills into her hand, about the neighbors who had sacrificed their grocery money just to contribute. She had failed them all. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. Instead, she pressed her hands together and whispered into the stillness, "God, I don't understand. I tried. I gave everything. Why wasn't it enough?" There was no answer, only the hum of the night outside her window. But Evelyn wasn't ready to let the silence win. The next morning she walked into Mr. Johnson's office with her head held high. He looked at her with tired eyes, already aware of what had happened at the auction. "Child," he said softly, "I know you're hurting." "I lost," she said flatly. "You didn't lose," he corrected. "Not yet. The game ain't over. That man might have bought the hotel, but you still have something he can't buy." Evelyn frowned. "What's that?" "Vision," Mr. Johnson said firmly. "That building is just bricks and stone until someone with vision makes it come alive. That man doesn't care about the Carlton. He just cares about making money. But you care about people. That's your strength." Evelyn listened, her heart steadying. He was right. The fight wasn't over. Weeks later, Evelyn got word that the new owners were already gutting the Carlton. They were turning the historic hotel into luxury condos, erasing its history brick by brick. The community buzzed with anger. "They don't care about us," one neighbor said bitterly. "They're just here to profit." Evelyn felt the fire reignite in her chest. She couldn't stop the auction, but maybe, just maybe, she could stop the destruction. So she did something bold. She rallied the community. She organized marches, petitioned City Hall, and held meetings in church basements. She reminded everyone what the Carlton had once meant and what it could mean again. Soon the protests grew. The local paper wrote about them. Then the TV stations came, and for the first time, the people who had once doubted Evelyn began to believe again. But her defiance did not go unnoticed. One night, as she left a meeting, Evelyn found her car window shattered. On the driver's seat lay another note. This one was shorter. "Stop, or you'll regret it." Evelyn's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was a threat. She stood in the dark, glass crunching beneath her shoes, the note shaking in her hand. And in that moment, Evelyn knew. Her dream had made her a target. The broken glass glistened under the dim streetlight like sharp little stars scattered across the pavement. Evelyn's reflection stared back at her from the jagged remains of her car window, her eyes wide, her jaw tight, her heart pounding. She clutched the note in her hand, its words still burning into her mind. "Stop, or you'll regret it." For a long moment she couldn't move. Her breath caught in her chest as she scanned the shadows. Was someone still watching her? The quiet night suddenly felt heavy, dangerous. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves made her body tense. But Evelyn was not a woman who bowed to fear. She slipped the note into her purse, stood tall, and whispered to herself, "You can scare me, but you can't stop me." Still, as she drove home with the cold air rushing in through the shattered window, doubt crept in. Who would go this far just to silence her? Was it the developers, the loan officer, or someone even closer than she realized? The next morning, Evelyn walked into her church basement where she had been organizing community meetings. The room buzzed with conversation as people set up folding chairs and poured coffee into paper cups. When she entered, all eyes turned to her. "Evelyn, are you all right?" one woman asked, noticing the small cut on her arm from the glass. "I'm fine," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. "They tried to scare me, but all they did was prove we're making progress. They wouldn't fight this hard if we weren't a threat." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. But beneath their nods and smiles, Evelyn could sense the worry. These were her neighbors, her friends, her supporters. They wanted to fight, but they also had families, jobs, and lives they couldn't risk. An older man stood up. "Evelyn, I've seen fights like this before. Developers have money and lawyers. They don't play fair. Are you sure this is worth it? The room fell silent, waiting for her answer. Evelyn let the question sink in. She thought about the hotel as it was now, empty, cold, and torn apart. And then she thought about what it could be, a place filled with laughter, opportunity, and dignity. Yes, she said firmly, it's worth it. Because if we let them erase our history, if we let them take our community's future, then what do we have left? We're not just fighting for a building, we're fighting for a piece of ourselves. Applause broke out. The doubt in their eyes softened into determination. Once again, Evelyn had reminded them why they were here. But not everyone in the room was clapping. Near the back, a young man leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his eyes sharp. Evelyn didn't recognize him. He didn't join the cheers, and when the meeting ended, he slipped out quietly before she could approach him. Something about him unsettled her. She filed it away in her mind, but didn't speak of it. That night, as she walked to her front porch, she noticed something strange. A black car was parked across the street, its engine idling. The windows were tinted, too dark to see inside. She paused, her keys clutched tight in her hand. The car didn't move. She waited. Still nothing. Finally, she forced herself to go inside, locking the door behind her. Through the curtain, she peeked outside again. The car was gone. Her hands trembled. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone was watching her. The next day, she decided to visit the Carlton herself. She hadn't been back since the auction, but something inside her told her it was time. She walked past the chain-link fence that now surrounded the property, its once grand entrance reduced to rubble and dust. She pressed her hand against the cold metal and whispered, "They don't see you, but I do." Suddenly she heard a voice. "You shouldn't be here." Evelyn spun around. The young man from the meeting stood a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets. His eyes were unreadable. "You followed me," she said, her voice steady but cautious. "No," he replied. "I've been keeping an eye on you. There are people who want you gone, Evelyn, and they're not playing games." Her chest tightened. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let's just say I used to work for them. I know how far they'll go, and if you keep pushing, you're going to get hurt." Evelyn studied him carefully. Was he a threat or a warning? Could she trust him, or was this just another way to break her spirit? "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because," he said, glancing around nervously, "I know something you don't. They didn't just buy the Carlton for condos. They bought it to bury something. And if you keep digging, you'll find out what. But you might not live long enough to tell anyone else." The words hit her like a thunderclap. Her breath caught in her throat. Bury something? Before she could ask another question, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the busy street. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart racing. What could be so important that powerful men would risk everything to hide it beneath the hotel? And in that instant, Evelyn realized her fight wasn't just about saving a building anymore. It was about uncovering a secret someone was willing to destroy her for. Evelyn couldn't sleep that night. The young man's words looped in her mind like a broken record. They didn't just buy the Carlton for condos. They bought it to bury something. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from her window stretching across the walls like long fingers. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind rattling the shutters, set her on edge. Finally she sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and whispered into the darkness, "If there's something they're hiding, I'll find it." The next morning, Evelyn went to see Mr. Johnson. She found him at his trucking yard, leaning against one of his rigs with a cup of coffee in hand. His weathered face lit up when he saw her, but his smile faded as soon as he noticed the strain in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked. Evelyn told him everything: the black car, the strange young man at the meeting, his warning, and the cryptic message about the Carlton. When she finished, Mr. Johnson rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Sounds like trouble. It is trouble, Evelyn agreed. But if there's a secret, if there's something they don't want us to know, then that's exactly what we need to uncover. Mr. Johnson's brows furrowed. Child, I admire your fire, but you're walking a dangerous line. These people got money, power, and reach. If they're hiding something, they won't hesitate to protect it. Evelyn's voice was steady. Then I'll be careful. But I can't turn back now. Mr. Johnson sighed heavily, then gave a slow nod. All right. If you're going to dig, don't do it alone. I'll stand with you. That evening, Evelyn returned to the Carlton, this time with a flashlight and a notebook. She slipped past the chain-link fence, her heart hammering in her chest. The once grand lobby was dark and dusty, its marble floors cracked, chandeliers draped in cobwebs. As her light swept across the room, she saw graffiti on the walls, broken furniture, and sheets covering what had once been fine velvet chairs. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of mold and forgotten years. But there was something else, too. Something strange. In one corner of the lobby, where the construction crews had already started tearing down walls, Evelyn spotted something that didn't belong. A heavy steel door, half hidden behind crumbling plaster. Her breath caught. She approached slowly, brushing away the debris with her hands. The door was old, rusted, but solid. She tugged at the handle. Locked. She pressed her ear against it. Nothing. No sound. No movement. But something about that door felt wrong. Why would there be a sealed steel door in the middle of a hotel lobby? What was behind it? Evelyn scribbled notes in her book, marking its location. She would need help to get inside. As she turned to leave, her flashlight beam caught movement in the shadows. She froze. Someone was watching her. "Who's there?" Evelyn called, her voice sharp. No answer. Her light swept across the room, catching only dust and broken glass. Then, in the far corner, she saw him, the same young man from before. He stepped out of the shadows, hands raised slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "I told you not to come here," he said. Evelyn tightened her grip on the flashlight. "And I told you I won't stop. What's behind that door?" The man's eyes flicked toward it, then back to her. His expression darkened. "You don't want to know." "Yes, I do." He shook his head. "Once you open that door, there's no turning back. They'll come after you harder than you can imagine. They'll ruin your name. They'll ruin your life. And if that doesn't work—" He let the words hang. Evelyn stepped closer, her chin lifted high. "Then tell me why it's worth that much." For a moment the young man studied her, as if weighing whether to trust her. Finally he whispered, "Because what's behind that door could destroy everything they've built." Her stomach knotted. "Then I have to see it." He shook his head again, backing away into the shadows. "Be careful, Evelyn. Some truths aren't meant to be found." And with that, he was gone. The next morning, Evelyn gathered a small group of trusted supporters, including Mr. Johnson. She told them about the steel door. They listened intently, some skeptical, others visibly shaken. "Steel door in the lobby?" one man muttered. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't," Evelyn admitted. "But it's there, and whatever's behind it, they don't want us to find it." Mr. Johnson folded his arms. "Then we'll find a way in." "Wait," another woman said nervously. "If this is as dangerous as it sounds, maybe we shouldn't—" "We have to," Evelyn interrupted, her voice firm. "If they're hiding something, it belongs to all of us to know. We've been pushed aside, ignored, and silenced for too long. This hotel was built on our community's back. If there's truth locked away in there, it's our right to uncover it." Her words silenced the room. Finally, Mr. Johnson nodded. "Then we'll need tools. And courage." That night, they returned. Evelyn, Mr. Johnson, and two others slipped past the fence under cover of darkness. The hotel stood like a silent giant, its windows black, its hallways echoing with every step. When they reached the steel door, Mr. Johnson handed Evelyn a crowbar. "You found it," he said. "You should be the one to open it." Evelyn's hands trembled as she wedged the crowbar into the seam. She pushed with all her strength. The metal groaned, resisting at first, then gave way with a long, painful screech. The door cracked open. A stale, cold air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of something old, hidden, and long forgotten. Evelyn's flashlight pierced the darkness beyond the doorway, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The beam of Evelyn's flashlight trembled against the darkness. Dust floated in the air, like ghosts disturbed from their long rest. Mr. Johnson stood behind her, his voice low and uneasy. "Lord have mercy. What is this place?" Evelyn stepped forward, her shoes crunching against gravel and broken tile. The hidden chamber stretched deep, carved beneath the lobby like a secret basement no one was supposed to see. The walls were lined with old wooden crates, their surfaces marked with faded stencils and strange symbols. Some were cracked open, revealing stacks of yellowed papers and ledgers. But what caught Evelyn's eye wasn't the crates. It was the photographs. Pinned across a far wall, barely holding together under the weight of time, were dozens of black and white photographs. Men in suits, women in long dresses, groups gathered in secret. Some photos showed parties in the hotel ballroom, smiling faces under crystal chandeliers. Others showed deals being made, hands shaking, documents exchanged. But then, Evelyn froze. The next set of photos told a darker story. They showed people being led into the basement, guarded by uniformed men. Black workers, their faces tired and resigned, forced to labor under the weight of crates. The same crates Evelyn now stood before. Her heart twisted. She stepped closer, brushing the dust from one photo. The caption beneath it read, "Carlton Supply Co., 1927. "Supply company?" she whispered. Mr. Johnson moved beside her, squinting at the images. "No," he said grimly. "This wasn't no supply company. Look at their faces. Those men weren't working willingly." Evelyn's stomach turned. "You mean—" Mr. Johnson nodded. "Exploitation. They used our people, Evelyn, right here, in this hotel, built their fortunes on their backs, and then locked the evidence away." Evelyn's chest heaved as she looked back at the crates. Her hands shook as she pried one open further. Inside were stacks of papers, contracts, payment records, names scrawled in black ink. Dozens, maybe hundreds of names. "They buried this," she whispered. "They bought the hotel so no one would ever know." Her words echoed in the chamber, heavy with truth. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above. The group jumped. Evelyn's flashlight shook as she pointed it toward the stairwell leading back up. "Someone's here," whispered one of the men who had come with them. Mr. Johnson's face hardened. "We need to move, now." Evelyn's mind raced. They couldn't just leave. They needed proof. She stuffed as many papers as she could into her bag, grabbed 2 of the photos, and motioned to the others. "Go! Go!" They scrambled out of the chamber, the steel door still hanging open. Their footsteps pounded through the ruined lobby. Another crash followed, a door slamming somewhere nearby. "They know we're here," Evelyn gasped. The group split instinctively, scattering into the shadows of the hotel. Evelyn darted down a side hallway, her flashlight bouncing against peeling wallpaper and shattered glass. Her breath came fast, her bag heavy against her shoulder. Behind her, she heard footsteps, heavy, fast, closing in. She ducked into an old dining room, crouching behind a collapsed table. Her heart hammered as the footsteps drew nearer. A flashlight beam cut across the floor, sweeping the room. "Find them!" a man barked. His voice was sharp, commanding. Evelyn bit her lip to keep from breathing too loud. Her fingers dug into the bag of stolen papers. She couldn't be caught, not with this evidence. The beam passed just inches from her hiding spot. She pressed herself against the table leg, praying the shadows would keep her safe. Then, silence. The footsteps moved past, fading into the distance. Evelyn waited, her body trembling, until the room was quiet again. Then she crept out, moving swiftly toward the exit. Outside, the night air hit her like a wave of freedom. She stumbled toward the fence, clutching her bag tight. Mr. Johnson was already there, his face etched with worry. "Did you get anything?" he asked urgently. Evelyn nodded, pulling out one of the papers. Her flashlight revealed a list of names, the heading stamped boldly, Carlton Hotel Labor Registry. Mr. Johnson's eyes widened. This is it. This is the proof. But before they could celebrate, the sound of engines roared behind them. Headlights cut across the lot. Black SUVs pulled up, their doors flinging open. Men in suits spilled out, moving fast, flashlights in hand. Evelyn's blood ran cold. They weren't free yet. "Run!" Mr. Johnson shouted, and in that instant, the chase began. Gravel crunched under Evelyn's shoes as she sprinted across the abandoned lot, clutching the bag of papers tight against her chest. Mr. Johnson ran beside her, his breath sharp and ragged. Behind them, the roar of engines grew louder, headlights slicing through the darkness like hungry eyes. "Don't look back!" he barked, grabbing her arm to pull her faster. But Evelyn couldn't help it. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the men spilling out of the SUVs, flashlights sweeping wildly. One of them shouted, "There! Stop them!" Her stomach dropped. These weren't random security guards. These were professionals, men who didn't hesitate, men who were here for one purpose: to silence them. They reached the chain-link fence, but Evelyn's hand slipped on the cold metal as she tried to climb. Mr. Johnson shoved her upward, his strength lifting her halfway. "Go! Don't stop!" Her shoes scraped against the links as she pulled herself up, adrenaline pushing her higher. She dropped to the other side and turned to see Mr. Johnson climbing after her, but before he could reach the top, a flashlight beam struck his face. "Got you!" a man growled. Hands grabbed at Mr. Johnson's leg. He kicked furiously, knocking one man back, but another reached up, clawing at his ankle. Evelyn's heart seized. "Mr. Johnson!" she cried, reaching through the fence. "Run, Evelyn!" he roared, swinging a fist at the man below. "Don't let them take what you've got." Evelyn hesitated for a split second. Every part of her wanted to fight for him, to pull him free. But she saw the truth in his eyes. If she stayed, they would both be caught. Her throat burned as she turned and ran, her bag thumping against her side with every desperate step. The streets were nearly empty at this late hour. Evelyn darted down alleys, across vacant lots, weaving through shadows to shake the men chasing her. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. At last she ducked behind a dumpster, pressing her back against the wall, her breaths loud in the silence. She clutched the bag tighter, whispering, "Hold on, just hold on." In the distance, the sound of footsteps faded. She had lost them, for now. But Mr. Johnson... Her chest tightened. She didn't know if he had gotten away, or if they had him. The thought twisted inside her, sharp and unbearable. At sunrise, Evelyn returned home. Her body ached. Her clothes were torn, but she refused to collapse. Instead, she emptied the bag onto her kitchen table. Papers, photos, contracts, all spread out before her like pieces of a puzzle. She traced her fingers over the names, her voice cracking as she whispered them aloud. Henry Lewis, Clara Williams, James Carter. Each name was a person. Each name carried a story. These weren't just documents, they were lives, lives used, forgotten, erased. Evelyn knew then that she wasn't holding just evidence. She was holding history, and history had a voice that could not be silenced, not if she found the courage to speak it. But she also knew the men who chased her would not stop. If they already threatened her once, if they had gone after Mr. Johnson, what would they do next? Her eyes fell to the window, where the first light of day broke through the glass. She pressed her hand against the table, steadying herself. "I'm not backing down," she whispered. That evening Evelyn went back to the church basement. The people gathered there gasped when they saw her battered clothes, the cut on her cheek, the fire in her eyes. "They came after me," she said plainly. "But I got what we needed." Murmurs spread across the room. She held up the papers high, her hand trembling but strong. They tried to bury the truth. They built this hotel on exploitation, on the backs of our people, and now I have the proof. The crowd erupted, some with anger, others with awe. One man shook his head. "Evelyn, this is dangerous. They won't let this go." "They don't have to let it go," Evelyn shot back. "We're going to take it from them. We're going to shine a light so bright they can't hide anymore." The room fell into a hush. Every eye was on her. Every heart hung on her words. "This isn't just about saving a hotel anymore," Evelyn said, her voice steady, rising with each word. "It's about saving our history, our dignity, our right to be seen. And if they think they can scare us into silence, then they don't know who they're dealing with." The crowd burst into applause, louder than ever before. People stood, clapping, shouting their support. For the first time, Evelyn didn't just feel like a dreamer. She felt like a leader. But as the cheers rose around her, Evelyn noticed something. Near the back of the room, half hidden in the shadows, the young man who had warned her stood again. His eyes were locked on hers, not with pride, but with something else. Fear. He shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "You don't know what you've started." And in that instant, Evelyn knew the fight was far from over. Because if the papers she carried were enough to expose history, then somewhere, someone was preparing to make sure those papers never saw the light of day. The applause in the church basement echoed like thunder, rolling through the walls, shaking Evelyn's bones. She stood tall at the front, clutching the stack of papers like a torch in the darkness. But even as people cheered, even as hope swelled in the room, her eyes remained locked on the young man at the back. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. He was staring straight at her with a warning written all over his face. And then, just as quickly as he'd appeared, he slipped out the side door. Evelyn's chest tightened. She forced a smile for the crowd, but in her mind, a single thought churned. Something's coming. Something big. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, every light in the house burning. She laid the papers out again, carefully sorting through them, the names, the ledgers, the photos. They all painted a picture of a hidden history, one that powerful people wanted erased. Her phone buzzed. A message, "Stay quiet or you'll lose more than a hotel." Her fingers trembled. The number was blocked. She deleted the message, but her heart pounded harder. They knew she had the papers. They were watching her every move. For a moment, Evelyn thought of giving up. She imagined packing the papers away, hiding them somewhere safe, and stepping back into the shadows. But then she looked at the faces in the photographs she'd taken from the basement wall. Faces of people who had been forgotten, erased. She whispered to herself, "If I stay quiet, they win. And if they win, we lose everything." The next day, Evelyn took the papers to a trusted journalist at the local paper, a woman named Rebecca Clark. Rebecca's office was tucked away in a small building downtown, stacks of files spilling across her desk. "You're telling me," Rebecca said, flipping through the documents, "that the Carlton was built on forced labor? That they covered it up all these years?" Evelyn nodded. "And they're still covering it up. That's why they bought the hotel back. They don't want anyone to find this." Rebecca leaned back, her eyes wide. "This is huge. But Evelyn, if I publish this, I'll be going up against men with money, men with power. They'll try to bury me." Evelyn's voice was steady. "They already tried to bury me, and I'm still here. If you publish this, we won't just be telling a story, we'll be setting people free. We'll be giving history back to the people who lived it." Rebecca studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, but we'll need more than this. We'll need witnesses, records, something to tie it all together. Otherwise, they'll dismiss it as rumors." Evelyn exhaled, relief and determination mixing in her chest. "Then I'll get you what you need." That evening, as Evelyn drove home, Her headlights caught something on the road. She slowed, squinting through the windshield. A tree branch blocked her path. She frowned. The road was clear when she'd left this morning. She stepped out of the car to move it, and that's when she heard it, the sharp click of metal. Her breath froze. She turned her head slowly, and there, in the shadows of the trees, stood a man in black, a mask covering his face, a gun gleaming in his hand. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Evelyn Parker," the man said, his voice low, steady. "You've been warned once. This is your last chance. Walk away, or you'll never walk again." The night closed in around her, the cold barrel of danger hanging in the air. Evelyn's knees felt weak, but inside, a fire blazed brighter than ever. She stared at the masked man, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her throat. "I can't walk away." The man tilted his head, almost amused. "Then you've chosen your end." And in the silence that followed, the world seemed to stop, before it exploded into chaos. The night split open like thunder. Evelyn's chest heaved, her eyes locked on the black barrel of the gun. The masked man's finger hovered on the trigger, the silence around them sharp as glass. For a heartbeat, she thought this was it, her fight, her dream, her very life ending right there on the side of the road. But then, tires screeched, headlights flared from behind. Another car barreled around the corner, flooding the road with light. The masked man flinched, raising a hand to shield his eyes. Evelyn seized the moment. She dove back into her car, slammed the door, and twisted the key. The engine roared to life. The man lunged forward, but Evelyn's foot hit the gas. Her car shot forward, the wheels spitting gravel. The masked figure shrank in her rearview mirror, swallowed by the dark. Her hands trembled on the wheel, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. But she didn't stop driving. Not until she reached the safety of her own driveway, doors locked, body pressed against the steering wheel in exhausted relief. She whispered through shaky breaths, "They won't scare me. Not now. Not ever." The next morning, Evelyn stood before the congregation in the church basement again. The people gathered were restless, whispering about rumors of trouble, about threats, about shadows on their doorstep. Evelyn raised her hands. "Listen to me," she said, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "They want us afraid. They want us silent. But fear is how they've controlled us for generations, and I will not let fear win." A hush fell. She stepped forward, pulling a photo from her bag, the one she'd taken from the basement wall. She held it high so all could see. "These are our people, forced to work, forced to carry, forced to build someone else's empire. This hotel was not built with honor. It was built on stolen lives, and if we let them erase this, we let them erase us." The room erupted in a chorus of voices, some angry, some inspired. One woman stood, tears in her eyes. "Evelyn, what do we do? How do we fight back?" Evelyn's gaze swept the crowd. "We fight with truth. We fight with unity. We fight by refusing to be invisible." Cheers rose again, but Evelyn could see the fear still lingering beneath the fire in their eyes. She knew the threats weren't empty. She knew the masked man would come back, or worse, someone higher up would. And she knew Mr. Johnson's fate was still unknown. Later that day, Evelyn's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside urged her to answer. "Hello?" she said cautiously. The voice on the other end was hoarse, strained. "Evelyn, it's me." Her breath caught. "Mr. Johnson? Where are you? Are you okay?" There was a pause, then a ragged cough. "They took me, kept me locked up. I don't know where. But I got out, barely. Listen to me. Whatever you do, don't go to the police. They're in on it." Her heart sank. "What do you mean?" "They've been protecting the developers for years. That's why nobody's ever spoken up. If you hand those papers over to the wrong person, they'll disappear. And so will you." The line crackled. His voice grew weaker. "You need allies, people outside this city, people they can't touch." Then the call cut off. "Mr. Johnson? Hello? Hello?" Silence. Evelyn lowered the phone, her hand trembling. The room seemed to spin. She was fighting men with money, guns, and now the law itself. Her vision cleared as her resolve hardened. If the local police couldn't be trusted, she'd have to take her fight higher. Beyond the city, beyond the reach of the men who wanted her silenced. But even as she thought it, her front window shattered. Glass exploded inward, raining across her living room floor. Evelyn dropped to the ground, her arms shielding her head. A brick rolled to a stop beside her, paper tied around it. With shaking hands, she unwrapped it. The message was scrawled in thick black letters, "Last warning." Her pulse raced. She looked at the broken window, at the open wound carved into her home. The war wasn't just at the hotel anymore. It had found her doorstep. The brick lay on Evelyn's floor like a live grenade, its message still burning into her mind. Last warning. She stared at it, her breath shallow, the cut of broken glass stinging her arms and hands. For a moment she wanted to scream, to give in to the fear that was clawing its way up her chest. But then she stood, shoulders squared, and whispered to herself, "If this is their last warning, then this is my first move." She swept the glass aside, grabbed the papers from her table, and stuffed them into a waterproof folder. Her decision was made. She couldn't keep the truth trapped in her living room any longer. It needed to travel further than her city, further than the crooked developers, and further than the police who had already chosen their side. The next morning, Evelyn boarded a bus to Washington, D.C. She wore a plain gray coat and a scarf pulled tightly around her head, hoping not to draw attention. Her folder was clutched tightly in her lap, never leaving her grip. Every time the bus slowed at a stop, she scanned the passengers boarding, her heart thumping as she imagined one of the masked men sliding into the seat beside her. Hours passed. Towns rolled by. Evelyn's eyes stayed fixed on the window, but her mind replayed the warning over and over. Last warning. In D.C., Evelyn went straight to a contact Rebecca had given her, a historian named Dr. Charles Everett, a professor who specialized in hidden histories of black labor in America. When Evelyn arrived at his office, she could barely speak from exhaustion. She dropped the folder on his desk, her voice hoarse. "You need to see this." Dr. Everett adjusted his glasses, opening the folder carefully. His eyes widened as he sifted through the papers, photographs, and ledgers. "Good Lord. Evelyn, do you realize what this is?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I need your help. They'll bury it if I try alone." Dr. Everett leaned back, his hands trembling slightly. "This isn't just about one hotel. This is about a system. Generations of exploitation, covered up and passed down. If we bring this to light, it won't just shake your city, it'll shake the nation." Evelyn nodded. "Then let's shake it." But outside, danger was already closing in. As Evelyn left Dr. Everett's office that evening, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street, the same type of vehicle from the hotel lot. Her stomach twisted. She ducked into a bookstore, peering through the window as the SUV idled. A man in a suit stepped out, speaking into a phone. He scanned the sidewalk as though searching for someone. They had followed her. Evelyn's mind raced. If they knew she was here, then Dr. Everett might be in danger too. She couldn't let them silence him the way they'd tried with Mr. Johnson. She slipped out the back door of the bookstore, heart pounding as she merged with the crowded evening streets. Neon signs lit the sidewalks, vendors shouted, and traffic blared. Evelyn pulled her scarf tighter and disappeared into the chaos. That night, she stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of the city, far from the downtown lights. The room smelled of mildew, and the heater rattled with every breath, but she finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. She pulled out her phone to call Rebecca. "They know I'm here," Evelyn whispered. Rebecca's voice was tight with fear. "Evelyn, you need to be careful. If they followed you to D.C., this is bigger than just local developers. These are people with reach, money, power. You can't fight them alone." "I'm not alone," Evelyn said softly. "I've got you. I've got Dr. Everett, and I've got the truth. That's more powerful than any gun they point at me." The next morning, Evelyn returned to Dr. Everett's office. But when she arrived, her chest froze. The door was ajar. Papers were scattered across the floor. A chair was overturned. "Dr. Everett?" she called, stepping inside cautiously. Silence. Her footsteps echoed against the tile as she moved deeper into the office. She saw the folder she'd given him lying open on the desk, but half the documents were gone, and then she saw it. A single message, scrawled in red ink across the wall. "The truth dies here." Evelyn staggered back, her heart racing. She didn't know where Dr. Everett was. She didn't know who had taken the documents. But one thing was clear. Someone had beaten her here, and they were willing to erase more than just history. The walls seemed to close in around her. She grabbed what papers remained, clutching them to her chest. Her voice cracked as she whispered into the empty room, "No. The truth lives here, and I'll make sure the world hears it." But even as she spoke, she knew the danger was now greater than ever. Because if they could reach into the nation's capital, there was no telling how far they would go to silence her next. Subscribe and comment if you want to hear more. The city smelled like rain, and the streetlights made wet spots sparkle. Evelyn sat very still in the small room behind the stage. Her hands held a cup of tea, but she hardly felt it. Her heart beat like a drum. Today was the day she would tell the whole world. For weeks she had planned this. She had hidden copies of the files in 3 different places, with Rebecca at the paper, with Dr. Everett's colleague at the university, and with a lawyer in another state. She did this because she had learned the hard way that papers could be taken, rooms could be ransacked, and people could vanish. She would not let the story die quietly. Not now, not ever. The hall was full of folding chairs and cables and cameras. Reporters walked back and forth, checking microphones and asking the same quick questions over and over. People from the neighborhood sat near the front. A few faces she knew, friends, church members, Mr. Johnson's wife, sat with their hands clasped. Rebecca stood near the podium with a phone in her hand, ready to record. Dr. Everett paced by the door, his face pale but steady. Evelyn breathed in and out. She thought of the names on the lists. She thought of the photographs pinned to the basement wall. She thought of the nights she could not sleep because men with black cars watched her house. She thought of Mr. Johnson being grabbed. She thought of the window smashed with the brick and the last warning. She stepped up to the podium. The bright lights felt hot on her face. The cameras blinked like big, curious eyes. "Thank you," she began. Her voice was small at first, but then it grew. "My name is Evelyn Parker. These papers show what happened at the Carlton. They show how men used other people to build their fortunes. They show names, ledgers, and orders, proof that things were done that should never have happened." A reporter raised her hand. "Evelyn, are you sure about all this? Can you prove it?" "Yes," Evelyn said. She put her hand on the folder. "Here are copies. Rebecca will publish what she can tonight. Dr. Everett will help explain the history. And I have shared the files with a lawyer and with others beyond this city. This is not just my fight. It is our fight." The room hummed. Cameras leaned in. People whispered. Some looked angry. Some had tears in their eyes. The truth had weight. It made the air heavy. After she spoke, Rebecca read the first facts aloud. She showed the ledger with the large names and the handwritten notes where people were listed as workers with no pay. Dr. Everett gave a short speech about how these papers fit into a larger history of stolen work and forgotten people. Outside, across the street, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors held homemade signs. Some in the crowd shouted, "Tell the truth!" Others chanted the names that had been found in the documents. The noise felt like the city waking up. For the first time in a long time, people were listening. Then a reporter from a national station asked to interview Evelyn live. "We'll go on air in 5 minutes," he said. "Are you ready?" Evelyn nodded. She felt tired and brave all at once. The live broadcast started. She could see herself on a screen above the stage, and also on phones and laptops in hundreds of homes. Her words reached people she had never met. She told the story plainly. She spoke about the steel door, the basement, the photos, the names. She spoke about courage and memory. She said the words slowly so children could understand. She said, "We will not let our people be erased." As the interview ended, people in the hall began to clap. Outside, the crowd grew louder. The news van's engines buzzed. It felt like a wave had started and now it would spread. But then something changed. A sound cut through the applause, a strange clanging, like metal hitting metal over and over. People turned their heads. The reporters looked at each other. The noise got louder. It came from the back of the hall. A man in a suit rushed in, red-faced. "There is a problem with the gas line in the building," he shouted. "Everyone must leave now. It's not safe." At first, people thought it was a mistake. Then the smell hit the room, the sharp, bitter odor of gas. Evelyn frowned. "Is this real?" she asked. The man kept saying the same thing, louder. "Please leave, now." Some people stood up in an angry hurry, not sure who to trust. Others moved slowly, worried about losing the crowd and the chance to be heard. Rebecca grabbed her phone, breathing fast. "Get out, Evelyn," she said. "We can't risk a fire." Evelyn looked around. She wanted to tell everyone more. She wanted to read the names. She wanted to say, "This is why we fight." But the gas smell choked the words. A woman near the door began to cough. Then a loud bang came from the stage lights. A tube in the ceiling cracked. Sparks fell, and for a second the hall was full of flying lights. Someone screamed. Children began to cry. People shoved and rushed for the exit. The noise of feet filled the hall like a storm. Evelyn grabbed her folder and tried to move toward the back, where the exits were not blocked. A man in a dark coat stepped in front of her and pointed to the door. "This way," he urged. But in the crush, Evelyn slipped. Her bag fell and papers scattered like birds. No, she had to hold the papers. Some of the documents fluttered free and skidded across the floor toward the stage where the lights still sparked in short bursts. She dove for a stack and snatched it up, but another gust of air from the broken tube knocked more pages free. They slid under chairs, under tables, toward the bright doorway where the crowd pushed for safety. Then the loudest sound of all, a deep, terrible roar from outside. The front doors shattered inward. People in thick masks and black clothes pushed in, moving with a purpose that made Evelyn's stomach drop. They were not there to help. Their faces were covered. They shouted orders she could not make out. Flashlights cut the dark. Someone grabbed for her arm. She turned and saw Mr. Johnson's wife, her eyes wide with fear. "Evelyn," she cried. "They're taking the papers. They're grabbing them." Evelyn fought through the crowd. Men in masks stormed past, collecting papers and ripping them. A masked man shoved a camera to the floor. Someone shouted, "Get the files! Get everything!" Rebecca stood in the middle of the chaos, trying to hold the phone to record, but a masked hand took it and threw it aside. Dr. Everett tried to stop a man reaching for a crate of files, and two masked figures shoved him hard. He fell and hit his head on the floor. Blood bloomed across the tiles. Evelyn screamed, and the sound was swallowed by the noise. Her hands moved faster. She snatched a half-wet page from the mouth of a masked man's hand. Another page ripped in the tug. The hall smelled like smoke, dust, and fear. The crowd was breaking like old wood. Then a flash from the back of the room. A dark box fell and a small flame started. It was as if someone had thrown a fire starter into the paper. The flame touched the edge of a stack of papers. It caught quickly, hungrily. The fire licked the pages and then jumped to another pile. People were yelling now to get out. Someone hammered at the windows to break them. The masked men shouted that everyone must leave and not look back. The security lights spun like angry moons. The smoke rose in thick black curtains that hid faces and hands. Evelyn could not see Mr. Johnson anywhere. She could not feel Dr. Everett beneath the thrash of feet. Papers burned in a small, fierce heat. They blackened, and the letters curled into ash and fell. The room smelled of old memories turning to smoke. Evelyn grabbed the last stack she could reach and held it tight. It was damp and warm from the broken pipe. She could see the names through the rain of ash and tears. She had to get out. She had to get the rest out. She had to save the names. But the door where she planned to go was blocked by a masked man with a flashlight. He pointed a gun. Her chest froze. She had no path to safety. The last thing she remembered before someone pushed her hard and the world became a confusing rush of elbows and smoke was the sound of the masked man's voice, low and calm. "Tell your friends. This is the last warning." Outside, the sirens grew louder. Inside, papers burned and letters whispered into the dark. Evelyn felt the heat on her face and tasted smoke. She closed her eyes and clutched the soggy folder to her chest as everything shook around her. The hall was a storm of people and flames and shouts. The cameras still rolled, but what they showed was not a quiet conference. It was a scene of chaos that would be replayed on screens all over the country. Evelyn's name would be on those screens. Her truth would be seen. But would it live? The flames ate the edges of the papers. Black ash fell like small, sad snow. Evelyn could only hope that the copies she had hidden in other places were safe. As masked figures pushed and the flames crawled, a loud crack echoed, too loud to be only the fire. Something heavy fell from the ceiling behind her. The sound rolled through the room and people screamed. Evelyn opened her eyes to see dust and sparks and a long, dark shadow in the smoke. She could not tell what had fallen. All she knew was that the ground shuddered beneath her feet and the lights went out, plunging the hall into a thick, choking dark. And in that dark, she heard the slow, deep sound of something breaking. Would the truth survive the night? The room filled with a terror that felt like a wall about to fall. The last thing the microphones picked up before they were smashed was the sound of many people shouting and the crack of heavy objects hitting the floor. Then, silence. The silence after the crash was heavy, like the whole hall was holding its breath. Smoke stung Evelyn's eyes. Her ears rang from the sound of the ceiling beam crashing down. She coughed, stumbling forward, clutching the damp folder to her chest. Screams echoed all around her. People were still pushing, still clawing their way toward the doors, but the smoke made it almost impossible to see. Evelyn's lungs burned, her vision blurred, and her arms trembled as she fought to keep the papers from slipping away. Somewhere in the dark, Rebecca's voice called out, "Evelyn, where are you?" "Here," Evelyn shouted back, her throat raw. She reached her hand out, and through the haze she felt Rebecca grab it. "Come on!" Rebecca cried, pulling her toward a side exit. They pushed through the crowd, dodging falling plaster and sparks from shattered lights. Evelyn held the folder tight, pressing it against her chest as though it were her own heartbeat. Just as they neared the exit, a masked man blocked the doorway. His flashlight beam cut through the smoke, landing right on them. His gloved hand reached out. "Give me the papers." Evelyn froze. The man stepped closer, gun at his side, voice low and threatening. "You've caused enough trouble. End it now." Rebecca shoved Evelyn behind her. "You'll have to go through us." The man raised the gun slightly. "That can be arranged." For a terrifying moment, time stopped. Evelyn's breath caught, her fingers gripping the folder so tightly the edges cut into her skin. Then, out of nowhere, a voice thundered from the smoke. "Leave them!" A figure barreled forward, Dr. Everett, blood streaked on his forehead but still standing. He swung a metal chair with all his strength. The masked man stumbled back, the gun clattering to the floor. The crowd surged forward in panic, and Evelyn and Rebecca used the chaos to dart past him, bursting out into the cool night air. The street outside was a storm of sirens, flashing lights, and panicked voices. Firefighters rushed toward the building, their hoses spraying arcs of water into the smoke-filled sky. Police tried to corral the frightened crowd, but the people shouted over them. "They tried to kill us! They burned the evidence! They don't want the truth out!" Reporters' cameras captured everything. The flames, the shouting, the chaos. And through it all, Evelyn stood in the street, her clothes torn, soot smeared across her face, clutching the folder. A reporter shoved a microphone toward her. "Miss Parker, is it true they tried to silence you? Is it true the hotel's history has been hidden all these years?" Evelyn lifted the folder high above her head. Her voice cracked but carried over the chaos. "They can burn the papers, they can chase us, they can threaten us, but they cannot burn the truth. The truth lives in us, in our voices, in our memories, and tonight the world saw what they'll do to hide it. Now you know. Now everyone knows." The crowd erupted in cheers, louder than the sirens. People chanted her name, raising their fists in the air. Evelyn's chest swelled with a fierce kind of hope. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting alone, but deep inside, she knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The developers had money, they had reach, they had men in masks willing to set fire to a hall full of innocent people. They would not stop now. As she stood there, her folder pressed to her chest, she saw the same black SUV crawl to a stop at the edge of the street. The windows were tinted, impossible to see inside, but Evelyn could feel the eyes watching her. Her heart pounded. The crowd around her chanted her name louder, as if shielding her with their voices, but she knew the battle was only beginning, and the next strike, they would make sure it cut deeper.